Good afternoon and welcome to NMA's series of webinars. And we're very happy to have a excellent webinar for you this afternoon. I'm Brian Berg, the Executive Director of NMA. And I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Known as the etiquette maven of the Pacific Northwest, Arden Clise is president of Clise Etiquette. As an author, speaker, trainer, and coach, Arden helps companies have the competitive advantage through polished, professional, and courteous employees. A popular writer, Arden wrote etiquette columns for 425 Business Magazine and the Pacific Sound Business Journal. She is also an author of Spinach in Your Boss's Teeth, Essential Etiquette for Professional Success. Arden has been quoted in several national and international publications, including Real Simple Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, China Daily News, and the European Weekly. Please help me welcome Arden.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Brian, for your introduction. It's lovely to be here with all of you, calling in from Seattle, Washington. It's not raining, but usually it is. So I would love to see your faces, if you're willing to put your video on. It's a lot easier to present when I actually get to see people's faces. So if you don't mind turning your video on, I would be so grateful. Yay, there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and I will go kind of a little bit in and out of my slides. So I will look at your faces. Some of you can't, I understand that. And I'm going to go ahead and share my slides and get going with the presentation. So we're going to be talking about the art of running more effective, efficient, and inclusive meetings. So this may look familiar to some of you. Meetings that are just downright boring, you don't feel included, they aren't engaging, they're not well organized. So I'm sure you can relate to some of these images, these people in the images. And there is a reason for that. So let's look at some statistics. I always struggle with that word, statistics about meetings. So the average meeting goer attends 62 meetings per month. Now I have a feeling it's higher than that because this was, I think, a few-year-old statistic, but a lot. They spend 31 hours in unproductive meetings per month. That is a big waste of time for them. Let's look at how they spend their time in meetings. 91% of your participants daydream. They're thinking about their grocery list, the weekend plans, anything but what's being discussed in the meeting. 39% of those participants sleep. Unbelievable that you see that number of people actually asleep. And 73% do other work. So they're focused on getting that email out or whatever is going on and not listening. And I'd like to discuss some inclusion issues. So men of color and women are more than twice as likely to be interrupted in a meeting. And that means that they're probably not going to contribute as much because they are interrupted more often. And we'll get into that a little bit more as I continue in my presentation. Introverts and remote workers are often ignored or interrupted. So there's a reason for that. There's based on some biases that I'll discuss in just a little bit. But thankfully, there are 9 steps for having effective and inclusive meetings. And before I jump into those steps, I want to just share a little bit about what an inclusive meeting is and why it matters. So in an inclusive meeting, basically people feel that they have the ability to share their voice and contribute, and everyone feels that they have equal opportunity to contribute. So why does that matter? Well, we have found, studies have shown that diverse companies report growing their market share 45% more often than their less diverse counterparts. So inclusive companies that have inclusive meetings do better than less diverse counterparts. And diverse companies are 70% more likely to capture a new market. So that's pretty convincing statistics to let us know that inclusivity is a really important component to a lot of things. And a lot of what happens in a company that is inclusive starts in their meetings. So I mentioned there may be some biases that we have that contribute to some of those statistics I shared earlier about contributing or not being able to share. One of them that a lot of people have is that smart people think on their feet and react quickly. And that is actually not true, because people who are just as smart could be that are quiet and maybe just they need more time to think through what they want to say before they say it. Maybe they're not comfortable jumping out and interrupting or shouting out in a meeting their thoughts, but they are definitely smart, and they definitely have things that they want to contribute. So we tend to ignore quieter people or people who aren't immediately throwing out information. So that's definitely a bias that we have that can contribute to meetings not being very productive or inclusive. Excuse me. Another one is out of sight, out of mind. So we tend to focus on the people that are closest to us within kind of viewing vision, or, within our vision. If someone is calling in or maybe even videoing in, but there's a group of people in a room, we're going to focus more on those people in the room and not so much the people calling in or videoing in. Those around us will get our attention. So we tend to ignore those remote workers or people who are calling in. Another bias is that men have more to contribute. So because of that bias, some people will give the floor more often to men. And that will exclude, of course, women. And if people aren't speaking up, aren't comfortable jumping in, as I discussed earlier, then you're going to be only paying attention to those who are comfortable jumping in and speaking up, and that tends to be men who do that more often. In fact, studies have shown that when a woman will share, or a person of color will share, that a man often will do something called mansplaining or manterruption, and basically saying the exact same thing that other person just said, and everyone will think, oh, that, the man really is smart. So these are all biases that we may have no idea that we have, and they do contribute to our meetings not being as effective and inclusive. So let's jump in to the first tip for making your meetings more inclusive and effective. So this is probably the most important thing, and that is having an outcome for the meeting. So what does that mean? An outcome basically says what you hope to accomplish at the end of the meeting. So ask yourself, when you're thinking about the meeting, what will be different at the end of the meeting? What will we have changed or gotten information on? So this is how you write an outcome. You start your outcome with the words, by the end of this meeting, you or we will have, and then use these action verbs ending in ed, showing completion. So at the end, by the end of this meeting, we will have provided recommendations on a new teleworking policy. We will have brainstormed a new brand promise. So it helps because then you know exactly what it is that you want to accomplish in your meeting, and you can then stay focused on making sure that whatever's being shared and contributed is focused on that outcome. So I would like to ask you, I do like to do a lot of interaction in my presentations. So tell me, by putting in chat, what an outcome you could have for your next meeting. So I'll give you just a minute or so to think about that. what's an outcome you could have for an upcoming meeting? And go ahead and put it in chat. Love to see your thoughts on that. I'm sure you're thinking away. All right, I think we've got something. Shelby, you said, by the end of this meeting, we'll have stated 2 or more goals to do by next meeting. Okay. Agreement on the business processes discussed. So we will have an agreement. We will have completed an agreement on the business processes discussed. Okay. By the end of this meeting, we will know when we will meet again. These are good. Common information communicated effectively. Okay, so that one's, we need to be really focused. So again, by the end of this meeting, we will, and what's the action verb ending in a ed? Response in a poll. Agreed on action items. Okay. Have new guidelines for using the core laboratory when RF is in use. Okay, so can you make that a action verb? So we will have provided recommendations, or we will have completed new guidelines. That would work. Good. By the end of this meeting, we'll have reviewed and approved path forward for next quarter. Okay, good. By the end of this meeting, we'll have gathered logs to help us determine cause for performance issues. Good, good. That's very specific. Established a plan for moving forward with maintenance policies. Great. These are all wonderful. Really good job. So the more specific you can be and follow this formula with the action verbs, the easier it will be for your participants to understand what you're trying to accomplish. All right, so moving on. So the next thing that's really important is to think about when and what time you schedule the meeting. Excuse me. So you probably can assume, I bet you all know, at least one day or one time that's terrible for having meetings. And that is Monday morning. And the reason is because everyone's getting back from the weekend. They're thinking about their weekend. They want to spend some time getting settled in back to the work day, checking their email. They want to catch up. So having a meeting Monday morning is really hard for people. The other really bad time to have a meeting is Friday afternoon. So opposite reason, people are thinking about the weekend, they're looking forward to whatever they're planning, they're making those plans, they're sort of ending the week and getting ready to leave work. Their brains are not engaged at all. So those are 2 days and times to definitely avoid. So I actually had I didn't have a direct manager, but a manager that worked for a company that I worked for, lived on an island, and he had to take a ferry to that island. And so he would schedule his staff meetings on Friday afternoons on the ferry. So his staff had to get on the ferry with him and ride the ferry, where he would get off, and then they'd have to ride back on a Friday afternoon. So that was not very thoughtful at all. Not a good use of people's time. I'm sure he thought it was convenient for him, but not good in other ways. So do think about your participants. The other thing that's really important is to make sure that you're not scheduling a meeting too soon. So ideally, at least 24 hours. I prefer 48 hours. And I'll explain more about why that's important, but also so many people are busy. They're going to a lot of meetings. You want to give them adequate time to get it on their calendar and prepare for the meeting. You want your participants to be prepared for the meeting. So those are all things to consider. Also think about how long of a meeting you want. Is your agenda too ambitious? Is it going to take too long? We'll talk about agendas in just a moment as well. And let me just stop and say, Daryl, if you're seeing anything that you want me to see in chat, go ahead and interrupt me and let me know, but I will pause every once in a while.
Okay, will do.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so this is important for a lot of reasons. Deciding who should attend your meeting. So one of them is you want to be sure that you've got the right people in the room. So think about the level of person that you need. Do you need a senior level or a manager level person, or can an individual contributor be in your meeting? If you need a certain level, be sure that you state that in either the email or the agenda. I know that I often, what my manager would ask me to attend in her stead, certain meetings, and often that was just fine. It was not a problem, but there were times when really she needed to be in that meeting because she had a bigger vision or a bigger idea about what was going on, and I didn't know. So think about that. The other thing to think about is the diversity of the people you're inviting. Are you inviting the same people over and over who tend to have the same ideas, that agree with you? If so, you're not getting the best from your employees. You're not getting more innovative, creative ideas when you continue to invite the same people over and over who kind of do groupthink. The other thing that's really important about your attendees is the size of the meeting room. So if you've got a certain size table and you're inviting more people than can fit at the table, it's going to create a kind of an unequal playing field for those people who can't sit at the table. So what happens is those people typically who are sitting on the outskirts of your table will not contribute as much because they'll feel not as included. And remember, out of sight, out of mind. So the people that are closest to you are the ones you're going to give your focus to, not necessarily those who are sitting out on the outskirts. So if you know, I can't remember if I have a slide for this, I took some slides out, but if you know that you have more attendees than can sit around the table comfortably, then no one sits at the table, everyone sits away. So you're equaling the playing field, you're making everyone equal. All right, so agendas are super important. How many of you, raise your virtual hand, and I didn't mention how to do this. This is how you raise your virtual hand. You go down to participants, click on participants at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and then you'll see raise hand. So how many of you use agendas in your meetings? Oh, good, I'm seeing some hands raised, 10 so far. Good, good. 13, good. That's great. That's great, great, great. Good. So agendas they may seem really old-fashioned and really, do we really have to have an agenda? You may put your hands down. You just do the same thing. You click on lower hand after you click on participants, or you can click on the little icon on your video. So yes, you need an agenda because they help people know in advance what's going to be discussed. And they also help you to stay on track in the meeting. Also, let's talk about what needs to be on an agenda. So the number one thing is your meeting outcome. What we already talked about, where you say, by the end of this meeting, we will have, and then you've got your action verb and whatever it is. We will have completed a new teleworking policy. So that is on top of your agenda. The date, time, and place, of course, what you want to be discussed. What are people going to be talking about in the meeting? And if people have a speaking role, if they need to be responsible for talking about a certain topic, make sure that that is noted on the agenda, their name. How much time is allotted for each discussion item on your agenda. And the reason why I like to include that is because it helps the facilitator keep the participants focused. It also lets the participants know about how much time you expect to devote to that topic. And you can always say, oh, looks like we're going, if you're not, getting anywhere, or people are going off on tangents, you can refer to the agenda and say, it looks like we've reached our time on this topic. I want to move on. And then, of course, anything where you want people to prepare for the meeting, any expected reading or anything that they need to do to get ready for the meeting. If they need to have the budget before the meeting, make sure that that's included with the agenda. You want people as prepared for the meeting as possible. So let's create an agenda. So I've sort of been hinting around with this one. It's in my brain, mostly because it's affecting my husband. But the meeting topic is the teleworking policy post-COVID. So I know many companies had to scramble and come up with a pandemic teleworking policy on the spot. And now perhaps you're thinking about doing something different when we get back from the pandemic. So what is the intended outcome for the meeting? So in this case, I was thinking that by the end of this meeting, we will have discussed what's working and what's not working with the current teleworking policy. So you've got your ED, your action verb in there, and what you expect to accomplish. And then who needs to attend the meeting? Well, probably HR, your IT folks, your managers, and this may be a group you hadn't considered or you may not have in your organization, but I encourage you to look at having this group. It's your equity or employee group reps. So those are the folks that represent the diversity within your organization that will come and be able to share the perspective of the groups, the different groups that you have, diverse groups that you have, and can make sure that all voices are being heard and paid attention to and considered. All right, and now what do you want your attendees to be prepared to discuss, and for how long? So be sure you put your topics, I didn't mention this, but you want to put your topics into a question. So for example, how has the current teleworking policy impacted productivity? So by putting it into a question, it makes it really clear that you want an answer. You want to discuss the answer and what you want to have after you've discussed that. Here's another one. Do our employees have the technology to support teleworking? If not, should we pay for those needs? So again, putting your questions, your topic questions, topics into a question help people stay focused. So ta-da, here's a meeting agenda based on what we just talked about. So you've got your meeting outcome. Of course, at the top, you've got the date, the time. If it's a Zoom meeting or if it's in person, you've got that information. So by the end of this meeting, we will have determined what changes, if any, need to be made to the current teleworking policy. Required reading is the current teleworking policy. I like to put the meeting facilitator if it's different from the person who called the meeting. Sometimes assistants call your meetings for you, and it is important that you include that information. And then your attendees, and then you can see that I've got the agenda items written in question form, and then also the amount of time allotted for each agenda item. I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions before I move on. You can either ask via chat or you can just unmute and ask me the question. I'm not sure if those hands up are people wanting to ask a question.
Hi, Arden. This is Colin Cato from the Nokia Leadership Association.
Hi, Colin.
Hello. Yeah, I had, funny you talk about agendas. I had one manager at one time that would refuse to join a meeting if it didn't have an agenda. You know, I think it's critical that you have, you know, so I guess after working for that manager who taught me a lot, when I see meetings without agenda, I sometimes challenge that, you know, what's the objective of the meeting? So
exactly. Yeah, good. Well, good for him, because without an agenda, people are like, why are we here? What's the deal? What are we trying to accomplish? Does the agenda need to be mailed in advance of the meeting, or is it, hold on, that just appeared. Or is it at the start of the meeting sufficient? No, it should be sent in advance, and I will get into why that is in more detail, but I'll basically tell you that the quieter participants, those who aren't as extroverted and able to just think on their feet, need time to think about what they're going to say, what they're going to contribute to the meeting. So that's why you want to send the agenda out at least 24 hours. I prefer 48 hours in advance of the meeting, so that people do have time. Good question. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and thank you, Colin, for jumping in and sharing. That was really great. And the question as well. Good, I'll continue. So step number 5 is to appoint a note taker. So why do we take notes? Well, we want to be sure we capture any takeaways, any next steps that we need to have from the meeting. What are people expected to do next? We also take notes to have a record of the meeting, particularly if there's any compliance or legal or board related issues that you need to make sure that you're capturing. Here's a really, really important inclusion tip, and that is, do not ask the same person, particularly a woman, over and over to be the note taker. So if you, what's best is to rotate the responsibility, and you can draw names from a hat, but be careful that you're not asking only women or only people of color to be your note takers, because that is sort of saying we don't think that others can do it, and only you are good for taking notes. So that's something to think about, is how you do that. The facilitator should not be the note taker. Some people know that, others think, well, I can facilitate and take notes, but it's really hard. It's hard to take notes. And the only thing that needs to be captured in notes does not have to be word for word or a bunch of information. Just capture any decisions that were made, and then any takeaways, any next steps or tasks that need to be accomplished. All right, so I love this cartoon. Raise your virtual hand if you struggle with starting your meetings on time. How many of you struggle with starting your meetings on time? 5 so far, 7. Yes, I'm seeing more and more people. Okay. So a lot of people struggle with this. Yeah, more and more people are saying they struggle with this. And the reason is, typically we think, well, we have to have everyone in the room before we get started. And people are late. They might be running late from a meeting. And after a while, people start to expect that you're going to start your meeting late. And they're like, oh, Joey always starts meetings late. I'll just show up, 5 minutes or 10 minutes late. I'll be fine because he waits. And so you're kind of reinforcing people to show up late. So what you need to do, because people's time is valuable, your time is valuable. If you're the facilitator, in your email, or your assistant can do this, in the email that goes out to those being invited to the meeting, state that you are going to start the meeting exactly at whatever time it is, 10 a.m., and then do. And that means even if you have only one person in the room, I know that seems strange, you still get started. Those people who trickle in and they see that you've started the meeting will start to get the message. So you really do have to stick with it and stay on time. It's very important. People get frustrated. Those who show up on time and are waiting for others, they get frustrated. Like, my time isn't valuable. You're going to just wait for everyone to show up. So it is really an important thing. So number 7 is to make sure that you introduce everyone, especially if it's a group that doesn't know each other, or if there are people calling in that maybe don't know who's who. do take time to make introductions, be welcoming, let people know who's in the room, who's calling in. And if there is people calling in, or even if they're videoing in, it might be useful to facilitate that, because it is awkward when you say, well, who's calling in from such and so, or you just say, who's calling in? Everyone's kind of waiting, like, was someone gonna go? Should I go? So instead say, I know that from Denver, the Denver office, we have Joe, we have Bub, we have who, so-and-so, and et cetera. So help facilitate that. All right, so we're going to launch a little poll, and this is about how you involve the quieter participants in your meeting. So I already talked a little bit about how there typically are some people who are more comfortable with thinking on their feet and jumping up and sharing and not holding back, and there's others that are quieter and tend to not share as often. And so we want to talk about how we include them, because you want to be sure you are getting their thoughts and their feedback. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. And what you're going to do is you're going to decide which of the answers is appropriate for how you involve the quieter members in your meetings. Hoping everyone sees that. Getting some good responses there. I'll give you a few more seconds to do this. Someone's saying they don't see a poll. Yeah, I'm sorry. For some reason, sometimes the polls don't show up for certain people, and I don't know why that is. But we've gotten 34, 35 out of 58. So I'm going to go ahead and pause there. And I'm going to share the results with everyone. So I will go through the question and the answers. So those who don't see the poll will see what I'm talking about. So the question is, how do you involve the quieter members in your meetings? And there were 5 choices, 1, 2, 3, yeah, 5. The first one was, say, Josh, when we talked earlier, you mentioned blah, 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 which I thought was a great idea. Would you be willing to share your ideas with the group? So 27 out of 35 of you thought that that was a good way to involve quieter members, saying something along those lines. And yes, it is. It's a great way because it's letting that person know that you had heard that they'd said something earlier that you thought was really useful and important, and that you're asking them to go ahead and share it with the group. You're not forcing them. The thing that would make this even better is to have this conversation with Josh or whoever the person is before the meeting, because people who tend to be more on the quiet side, the introverts in your group, really are uncomfortable being called on the spot. This one is not really calling them on the spot because you're sharing something that they had shared with you earlier. But if you can do this in advance, that's even better, because then that person is prepared and ready. Build in writing or reflection time and small group discussion. So 9 out of 35 of you thought that that was a good way. And it actually is. It's a really good way. So everyone likes to participate in different ways. Again, introverts do not like speaking up. and thinking on the spot. That's not in their comfort zone at all. So having writing or reflection time or small group discussion allows them to think through their thoughts and allows them to process their thoughts in a safer, smaller group. So it's a really wonderful way to get the quieter folks to participate more. Say, Deneen, you're awfully quiet. Any thoughts on the budget? So none of you picked that. I'm so glad you didn't, because that is not a good way to get someone to be participant in a meeting. It's putting them on the spot. It's drawing attention to them. That person is going to wilt. They're going to feel so uncomfortable that you've just called them out for being quiet and are asking them on the spot to share some thoughts. Have a dedicated introvert time and invite them to share. So 3 out of 35 of you thought that was a good one. And it's actually not a good one, because you are calling attention to the introverts in the room and putting them on the spot and saying, oh, hey, you introverts, you go ahead and sit over there and talk and, then come back. So not a good way to go about it. And then say, Michelle, based on what Chang shared, what stands out most for you? So 12 out of 35 of you thought that was a good response or a good way to include people, and it is. So it is because you're not putting Michelle on the spot by saying, what do you think? Or how should we handle this budget issue or whatever? You're asking that person to add on to what someone else said, which is safer for that person. And if it doesn't feel like it's putting all the pressure on them. So that's also appropriate. And I'm going to close that. And I know that some people shared in chat as well. And I'd love to just look at that, because I think there were some good things that I noticed. Let's see. Ask some questions or what they think. So yeah, so again, just be careful about how you ask questions. Another way to do it is to meet with them in advance, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more. So I mentioned that with the example with Josh. Anytime you can give someone a heads up before the meeting is really great. Ask people directly their opinion. So again, be careful when you ask directly, because those who are quieter really get nervous being asked to contribute immediately. So anytime you can give them a heads up in advance or have them add on to what someone else said, or like I said, say, you shared a really great idea when we were talking in the hallway, and I would love for you to share that today if you don't mind. So just being careful not putting people on the spot, the quieter people. Okay, good, great job. Let's move on. Oh, I did have this. Okay, wasn't sure if I'd kept it. So this is kind of an interesting little slide. So there are a few things to think about when it comes to seating. So I already told you in advance the importance of making sure that your group fits around the table. If they don't, that you then have no one at the table, so that you equal the playing field. But there's some interesting little things about where to sit to most get the facilitator's attention. So if the facilitator is at number 1, the head of the table over here, and you want to be sure that you're seen and you're able to contribute easily by the facilitator, which seats do you think those might be? What are going to be the most visible seats? 7, 2, 5, 8, 5, 2, 8, 3, and 7. Yeah, so some of you are correct. They are 5, 3, and 7. Now the 3 and 7 might surprise some of you, because it seems like they're kind of buried. But when you think about when you're looking down a table, you're facilitating, you're at the end, you're number 1, you typically don't look at the people closest to you. You look down the table. So you're going to be looking more at the next seat in, 3 and 7. And of course, the seat directly across from you. So those are the most visible seats at a table. Now, let's say you have two people that always get into it. They disagree, or they, they jump in and interrupt each other all the time. Separate them. And, maybe you think, well, how do I do that? You could have place cards on the table. And that might be a great idea anyway, just to make sure people are mixing it up and not sitting next to the same person and doing side conversations all the time. So put those two people that get into it on the same side of the table with someone between them, because that way they can't see each other and they're less like, they're not going to do side conversation. They're not going to get into it. All right, step number 8, keep the meeting on track. A lot of people struggle with this. So that's why your agenda is so important. It's important because you can refer to your agenda and say, it looks like we're going off track right now. I'd love to get back to what we're talking about on the agenda here. We have 5 more minutes to cover this topic. So you do need to be a strong facilitator. There is a book called The Art of Gathering, and her name's Priya, I'm forgetting her last name, but she talks about being a gracious diplomat or something like that. Oh, shoot. Anyway, basically she's saying you need to be gracious and diplomatic, but also firm. You do need to take control as the facilitator. That is your job, and make sure that people are not going off on tangents that are not helpful to the discussion that you are having in that meeting. And you just call it out. You just say, Mary, I love that idea. It's really a wonderful idea, but I'd like to get back to talking about the budget right now. Get their name and then get them focused. So let's have another discussion. What do you do when someone continually interrupts you when you're speaking? Anyone have thoughts on how you can handle when someone continually interrupts you in a meeting? You can put it in chat. Thoughts? Ask them to hold their questions or thoughts. Explain that if we were going to get through the agenda, hold their comments to the end. Ask to hold all comments and questions to a later time. Let them get their thoughts out, and then ask the entire group to hold all questions and comments until the end. Yeah, what if you are the person yourself, you're a participant, not a facilitator? What if you're a participant who continually gets interrupted? Politely make the person aware of what he or she is doing. Acknowledge their concern and table it for future discussion. Good. Mute his microphone. That's good. That's effective. Keep on hold for covering at end. So basically saying, we'll discuss that later. Send a detention. Hey, someone says, hey, so-and-so, give me a second to finish. And don't feel ashamed. Absolutely. Yeah, someone said give them the look. So many of those are very effective. If you are someone who continually gets interrupted, and again, I'm talking as participant, it is really important, and the facilitator isn't helping you, it is really important you speak up. And again, sort of using the similar technique to what I just taught you for people that are going off tangents. You say the person's name. Joe, I don't, sorry to any Joes out there. That's the name that comes to me. Joe, I'd like to finish my thought. Please let me finish. Or you could say, Joe, yes, good point. I'd like to finish what I was saying. If you are continually interrupted by this person on a regular basis, outside of the meeting, at a private time, take them aside and say, you may not realize this, but you interrupt me a lot in meetings. would you mind holding back and not interrupting me? Sometimes people have no idea. And again, back to the fact that men tend to interrupt women and men of color 2 times more often. They get women and men of color get interrupted 2 times more often. So we love you, men, but you do tend to be a little bit more interrupting. And so you probably don't even know it. You just don't know it based on our biases. So it is important that you call it out and you say something to someone if they continually do it. All right, number 9, end on time. So this is just as important as starting on time. And if you are someone who, if in your meeting you have maybe 5 more minutes, maybe 10, to finish what you have on your agenda, ask the group if they are willing to stay, if they can stay. If the majority of the people cannot stay, then schedule another meeting to finish the agenda. Don't hold people hostage. It's just not fair to them. They have other meetings to get to. The other thing to consider is, if you are continually going over time, are your agendas too ambitious? Do you just have way too much that you can cover in the amount of time that you're allotting? Either shorten what you're trying to accomplish or schedule a longer meeting. But do end on time. Your participants will thank you very much, and they'll be very happy that they can get on to their other things on time. Okay, so let's talk specifically on some tips for inclusive facilitation. So I've sort of talked a little bit about this, but what I mean by set meeting expectations in advance is there's a few things you can do. You can say in your email, please come prepared to share and listen in this meeting. So you're signaling that you want people to also listen, for those people who tend to just share all the time. You can also contact those people who tend to be the contributors and the people who always share and don't allow others the opportunity to share. You can contact them in advance and say, you know, hey, Sam, I love that you always have so much enthusiasm and really great ideas in our meetings. I'd love for you to hold back a little bit on this meeting, or you know, just only share one time, or you know, I really want to allow other people who typically don't share as often the opportunity to share. Would you mind holding back? So set those meeting expectations in advance, and also do it with the introverts in the group. So reach out to them, phone call or email or a personal meeting, and say, I really value your insights. You always have such good thoughts and ideas, and I really want you to come to the table feeling that you can share some of those ideas. So again, you're just welcoming them, letting them know you value them and that you feel their voice is important. So this goes back to sort of introductions, but this is a way to make sure everyone in the room feels welcomed and important. And that is to welcome every single person who's attending your meeting by name. If you're not sure about everyone's name, go look on the staff directory list, or you know, make some place cards, and then when they sit down, you can see their name. But it does create this nice environment when you welcome them by name. Again, state meeting norms in advance of the meeting, or not in advance, but in the meeting. So again, you could reinforce that we're here to both listen and contribute. You could state that you want people to raise their hand before they share, or however you want them to share. You could say we're going to have writing time. So set out those meeting norms so people know what to expect. We've talked about this for involving the quieter members of the group, and that is to create a variety of ways for people to participate. So whether it's writing time, small group discussion, breakout rooms in Zoom, it could be if it's in person, you've got flip charts around the room and you have people writing on them or putting Post-it notes. So any way that you can get people to interact in different ways rather than just sitting and staring at each other, you're going to get a lot more ideas, a lot more energy, and contributions. This is vitally important. Make sure that as the facilitator, you are modeling inclusive behavior. That means you're not interrupting, and unless you need to bring something back on track, then you do need to interrupt. But you're not interrupting someone who's typically interrupted, and you are shutting down those who interrupt on a regular basis. And that is stop those dominators. Don't let them continue to dominate the meeting. So just something like, you know, I really appreciate your enthusiasm. I would love to hear from the rest of the group, or for those who haven't had an opportunity to share. Any questions on that? Okay, I'm going to move on. And this is some tips for including your remote members. So one of the ways, so remember I said out of sight, out of mind. This is particularly true when they're calling in. So imagine they're in the same room with you. So that means you could put pictures of them on chairs or on the wall. So people are reminded, oh yeah, all these different people are calling in from different places. So having some visual that people are actually there. Be sure that you're muting the phone if you're all assembling in a group. I know we're probably not doing that much these days, but if you're assembling in a conference room and others are calling in, mute that phone in the conference room, because it's really cacophonous to those who are calling in and they don't know what's going on, when the meeting is started, etc. Do let them know you're muting the phone in advance so that they're not wondering, am I on the right call? Be really careful of noise. So when someone is calling in and you grab a bunch of papers next to that speakerphone, it sounds like a windstorm. Same with like clicking a pen. All of those noises are amplified. That's why conference call phones are so effective. So be really mindful of how much noise you're making. And that includes side conversations, because it'll be picked up by conference call phones, the speaker, and those calling in will have no idea if that's part of the discussion or if it's they just don't know. So really try to avoid having side conversations. That's where the facilitator needs to step up and stop those side conversations. And then be sure as the facilitator, you're calling on the remote people, and actually use their name if you can, so that you're not saying, hey, anyone from Denver want to speak up? Because again, there's going to be that silence of who speaks up, how do we, blah, blah, blah. Just call on them by name. There is an option, and that is require everyone to call or video in to even the playing field. So again, if you're going to have a group that is in person and some calling in or a lot calling in, just have everyone call in, and then you even the playing field or video in. Okay, we just have a few minutes. I'd love for you to put in chat. I want to just discuss really quickly some meeting manners. So any annoying thing that people do in meetings, what are the annoying things that just drive you crazy that people do in meetings? Go ahead and write those in chat. Looks like I'm getting a bunch. Okay. Side conversations, talking over each other, when someone has a comment to everything that's said, holding side conversations, their yappy dogs barking around them. Yeah, Zoom has really changed a lot with getting in people's homes. Eating, yes, eating in meetings, very not good at all. Talking over people, bringing their laptop and working on it during the meeting, yeah, big no-no. Chewing while they're unmuted, Good. On their cell phone, yes. Talk to me directly when I'm trying to focus on the presenter. Yep, that's really annoying. Eating, good. Cell phone use, absolutely. I'm going to quickly go through my list because I'm almost out of time. So you can put your virtual hand up if you are, and then if you are guilty of any of these, you'll put it down, and we'll see how many hands are still up at the end. So go ahead and click on participants and then raise hand. And if everyone can raise their hand, we can see how many hands are left when I'm done with my list. We've got 15. Keep raising your hand. Again, click on participants, and at the bottom of the participants box, it says raise hand. Okay, I'm going to get started. So if you are guilty of doing any of these, you're going to put your hand down. If you regularly arrive late or leave early, put your hand down. Okay. If you didn't read the material before the meeting, I have a feeling a lot of people will be putting their hand down on that one. It's really important to read the material before the meeting. Yep, we lost a few hands. All right, if you had side conversations or chats, and when I say chats, they're constant chats during the Zoom meeting or video meeting that you're in and interrupting people, whether it's personal chats or with everyone. Okay, we lost some people on that one. If you looked at your phone or other device in the meeting, put your hand down. Okay, wow, we lost a lot of people on that one. So that is a really annoying thing to people. You want to stop doing that one. If you monopolize the conversation, put your hand down. Okay, we didn't lose anyone on that one. And if you regularly interrupted others, put your hand down. And we still have 7 hands up. If you didn't mute yourself when you're not talking, put your hand down. So these are all no-nos. And the last one, if you kept your video on while you moved around in virtual meetings. Woo, I'm getting dizzy. Put your hand down. Okay, we have 7 people with their hands still up. Congratulations to those people. Nicely done, nicely done. The rest of you, you're okay, it happens, but just take note, don't do these ever again. All right, so let's wrap up. We've talked about the 9 ways to have more effective, productive, and inclusive meetings. And we've talked about how to be a facilitator that has more inclusion and what inclusion is. So I hope that you've walked away with at least 2 new ideas for having your more effective meetings. I would love to take your questions. And in the meantime, please sign up for my e-newsletter. I share bulleted etiquette tips that people find very useful. And the way you can sign up for that is to text the word manners to the number 22828, or go ahead to my website, which is cliseetiquette.com. I do have a business etiquette book called Spinach in Your Boss's Teeth. It's on Amazon. It's a great gift idea. So I hope that you'll look into that. Love to take any questions, and then we'll pass it on to Brian. Any questions? Looks like we got a couple. Clicking their bit. All right. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brian to wrap us up. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that you walked away with some helpful information, and that you have a great day.
Thank you, Arden. Thank you. I appreciate that. That was a spectacular session. The session recording will be available for replay on Monday of next week. And I'd like to share one more thing before we adjourn. As discussed in our NMA annual meeting, one of the initiatives for 2021 is to leverage our close partnership with the Institute of Professional Managers, which was part of NMA at one time, as you know. We're pleased to announce that NMA members will have an opportunity to attend a webinar by Forbes School of Business and Technology and it will be presented by Professor Bill Davis, who is also a board member of ICPM. This is going to be free to the NMA members as a start to our closer partnership with ICPM and delivering greater value to the NMA members. You'll be receiving an invitation to this at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time today. And so it'll give you a link to sign up for this. And I hope all of you can take advantage of the great opportunity. And with that, Arden, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And we will talk to you soon. Goodbye.